Okay. Should we first do a quick recap? So we're on to the third week of the portrait project, and you're welcome to keep going for this if you're mid-portrait. I think what I'm going to do is I'll probably call it a day for myself, and I'll start another project for anybody else who wants a different project next week, and that'll be looking at textures, sort of paint textures, probably applied to some sort of landscape. And some people like to have lots of time on a painting, or drawing. Other people like to work on a different project each week almost. So I'll vary the length of some of the projects this year. So this will be like a 3-week project for me anyway. So a quick recap then. So what I've done, these are some of the the 2 demos I've done so far. I think last week it was that one actually, wasn't it? So this was just looking at basic proportions of the face and how you can set it all out if you want to. So that was using that image there, I think it was that one. Well, I'm not quite sure, it doesn't look that much like it when I look at it now. But it's also, so that's setting out basic proportions. This one was using a limited palette, so more like a kind of painterly sketch or a sketch in paint, let's say, that might be a better way of saying it, and using just a couple of colours. So I used a yellow ochre, a cadmium red, and a black and a white. So it's a very limited palette. So the idea being that you could get some sort of quick sketch of a person down in one session with that. So that was that. And then this week I thought we'd have a look at pastels, but also have a look at drawing children. So this is one. These 2 I started obviously a couple of weeks ago, but I thought I could develop them into pastels. So both are children, and I'll work on this one a little bit more, I think. So obviously it started out something a bit like that, just a line drawing. So it's now at the point where it needs either some colour or some light and dark in there. So I'm just looking at here, and what I tend to do to start with is just get some pastel down. With pastels, one of the difficulties is that I find it really hard to get very naturalistic tones and colours. I find it much easier to get a more precise, accurate mix with the paints than I do pastels. But what I can do is almost like getting an approximation by sort of overlaying different colours one over another. So around about here I'm thinking this sort of warm orangey colour. Around the side there it's a little bit darker, so maybe I'll start perhaps a little bit of purple, and then very slightly darker brown. That's supposed to be brown, that's a bit too dark actually, a bit lighter. So kind of get something in the general areas. I'll work a little bit more around here too. So perhaps a bit more of this sort of orangey brown as a base colour. And just want to kind of put that on fairly lightly, and then work that into the paper. So you can either use one of the blenders, so you get these paper blenders, these are quite good. Just kind of work those in like that. Or use your hands if you want. The other thing you can use is sometimes like a bit of very soft leather, like chamois leather. That's quite nice for just sort of blending colours and tones in. So just trying to get something down, just almost like as a background colour that I can then work into. And then obviously where he's got a shaved head, that's more kind of greys into the, it's more of a grey, so let's go for that sort of grey, and I think a bit darker actually, something a bit darker than that. So again, I haven't got many in between greys. I think that one's going to be too light. That's a little bit darker, but I actually want to go a bit darker still. One thing that is quite a good idea is just have a bit of paper to try all the colours out. So I did that a little bit this morning on there, just sort of trying out the colours you've got. So if you're working with pastels, have a bit of scrap paper, because quite often how they look, just looking at them is quite different from how they are once you've got them on there. So I'll work that in a little bit, and then maybe that can go a bit darker still. Like that. And then once I've got something down, I'll then start to make adjustments. So to me, there's quite a lot of kind of reflected, maybe yellows in there, a little bit lighter, and just down here. And possibly lighter still, so perhaps a creamy colour just to lighten that up a little bit. Just across his brow. Obviously with the pastels you can even use them on their sides or the tips or the corners, so you've got different marks you can create. And then once I'm there, I would then perhaps work into his eyes a little bit more before I go much further. So I've got quite a dark brown there, and that can go into his actual pupil and iris. There's a little bit of light across the top there, so I'll leave that. The whites of his eyes they're not bright white. This side is slightly more shadows, perhaps a little bit of the pale grey. I'll pop that down and then use the blender just to work that in. And I may lighten up a little bit, because that side of his face is in shadow. That doesn't be too bright. Also, pastel pencils can be really useful. So I've got a couple of sets of these here. If you want to try any of these, you're very welcome to give them a go. But I find that the pencils are really good for getting these sort of sharper lines. So things like the shape of his eyelid, it's much easier to just create that with a pastel pencil. A little bit of shadow just in there. I'm just going to lighten that a tiny bit. So I don't want to go completely white, but this sort of creamy, or if I've got pale grey, that might be better. I'll go for the creamy colour. Lighten up a tiny bit. Something like that. And then around his eye socket there's quite a lot of shadow, so again a little bit deeper there, definitely deeper in here, shadow in here, and really just popping that on to start with, and then I can blend some of that in with the blender. It's frowning a little bit, so I'm bring some of that up there. Some of these shadows, for me, have got a very slightly cool feel, right? So a little bit of a purple or lilac in with the mix, and just sort of cool them off a little bit. That might be, yeah, that I think helps. I don't make it too strong. And then just working my way around. There's a little bit of shadow under here. Like that. With children, one of the things that makes them look like children rather than adults is the scale of the features. So quite often the eyes might appear slightly deeper, maybe not quite as wide. Noses will be a lot smaller. So I would imagine as he ages, this part of his face will sort of stretch out, and he'll get a much longer nose, and that will probably become a bigger nose. So that's one of the things. Is the size of the features. Has anybody got any questions?
Yeah, is that pastel paper you're using?
It's not actually, no. I mean, pastel paper would be quite nice.
Expensive,
it is more expensive, yeah. This is just cartridge paper. I was thinking, I'm basically using this just because I've already got the drawing set out. But I was thinking, yeah, pastel paper, sometimes the toned paper is quite nice. So I've not really used this one yet. I've kind of got through one of these sketchbooks, these grey ones. Yeah, the grey I think would work quite nicely with pastel. So that's probably what I'm going to try and do a little bit more. I wouldn't mind working a bit bigger than that. So next time I order some of these, I'll go for a bit bigger. But these aren't particularly expensive books, so if the pastel works, I try and do my own sketchbook and it worked reasonably well. With pastel paper, what you ideally want is something with a little bit of grip. If it's very smooth paper, the pastel will just skid over the surface. So this isn't too bad, but I can't load it up too much. It will very quickly clog.
I'm using the pastel mix.
The pastel will sort of clog the paper up.
I'm using pastel matte.
Pastel,
Pastel matte.
pastel matte, yeah. So that I think is more of a like a sanded surface, which is quite nice. So it's nice to work into. Sometimes I use like a stiff brush, and that can loosen up the pastel. I can then get more colours and tones in there. I can kind of get a bit more sort of in there. Yeah, the pastel matte paper is good. You can also buy like a pastel ground that you can paint onto cardboard, and that's quite nice to work on. So it's like an acrylic paste that you sort of paint on. So again, that's quite a nice one to work on. Yeah, so but I think the advantages are that it's quick, it's instant colour, you can kind of overlay one thing over another, you know, it can make alterations fairly easily, unlike something like watercolours where you can't, you know, you can actually wipe areas back and rework them and things like that. You know, I can lift some of this out and put some other, you know, I want to go a little bit lighter in places. Get some nice soft blends, which is nice, which is an advantage over acrylics, which are quite a sort of sharp. The downside probably is storing them and looking after them. They're very easy to damage. They will rub off very easily. You can possibly fix them, but sometimes it darkens the colours. So ideally, just try and put something like a piece of tissue or greaseproof paper over to stick it down one edge just to protect the surface, stop it doing that. Really. That's what I've tended to do in mine. Yeah, so a little bit on pastels. So, and as I say, next if you want to carry on the portraits next week, that's great. If you fancied a little bit of a experimental textures, maybe apply to a simple landscape, that's what I'll cover next week. And I'll probably use, it could be any medium really, but it could be like maybe acrylics, colour oil, something like that. I could experiment with a few things. Okay.